I'm Bernina expert Amanda Murphy, and I'd like to show you how to use my Every Hexagon quilting templates. There are two sets of templates. Set 1 quilts hexagons that are 1, 1.5, 2, and 2.5 inches in height, while set 2 quilts hexagons that are 3, 4, and 5 inches in height. They both work the same way. First, let's quilt a row of point-to-point hexagons. I'll begin by marking the center of my channel using a cutting ruler. I usually choose a hexagon that is slightly smaller than the channel that I'm going to quilt. So I slip on the template, and making sure that it is nowhere near the foot, I bring up my bobbin thread at that midline on one side of the channel. And then once my foot is down, once I begin sewing, I bring the ruler over to the foot. So you'll note that I use the lines on the ruler to align them with the center of the channel, on that line I drew with chalk earlier. And I go all the way around the hexagon. And in essence, when I'm doing a row of hexagons or a column of hexagons, I'm going to be doing a hexagon and a half, and then I'm going to be clipping my threads here and shifting the template over and then going around again. I do prefer to change directions each time I do it. Okay, you'll note here that the white lines on the template itself go over the previously quilted hexagon. That's why I turned the template so I could use those lines. So a hexagon and a half, and then I shift over, and those white lines again line up over my previous hexagon. And this time I remembered to change directions. I do prefer to change directions. I think it gives a cleaner finish, but if I forget, I don't rip out the stitches. And now I shift the template over again. And make a hexagon and a half. I like to stop at each corner and pause to get a crisp, clean stitch. Continue until you have filled the quilting area. You might have to quilt a partial hexagon at the edge of the quilting area. Slip off your ruler. End your threads by doing a few little stitches, and you are done. You've completed a row or a column of point-to-point hexagons. Let's quilt a row of side-to-side hexagons. Once again, I've chosen a hexagon that is slightly smaller than my quilting space. And I'm again going to quilt a hexagon and a half. Pause just for a second in each corner to get a double stitch. If you pause for too long, you'll actually create a knot or even pierce your thread, so you want to avoid that. If you don't pause for long enough, then you'll get pulled threads at each corner. Now, when you do the side-to-side hexagons, the black lines on the template line up over your previous quilting lines. Generally, I like to change directions with each hexagon. So if I stitch the first clockwise, the second would be stitched counterclockwise, and so on. But if I make a mistake, I don't worry about it. I would not rip that out. Now here I'm using the dashed line on the template to center my quilting within the channel. Ideally, you want to get 2 stitches in each corner. If you get too many stitches, you'll create a knot at the back of your quilt, or you can even pierce your thread. And if you only have 1 stitch, sometimes that can result in pulled threads. So pause just for a moment in each corner as you work down the row. Once again, I'm using the dashed lines on the template to ensure that I'm centered within my quilting area. And I have 1 partial hexagon at the end, so I'm just going to quilt over to the side of the quilting area and quilt back along the edge, just shifting my template, then lining it up again, and completing that partial hexagon. Let's quilt a hexagon all over fill. So we'll begin by creating a row of side-to-side hexagons, and right here I'm using the lines on the template to make sure that I'm doing a hexagon right at that bottom left edge of the quilting area. So I'm going to start, and of course I bring down my needle and my foot before I bring my template over, and I'm using those white lines to align with the sides of my quilting area. And I do this just like I showed you before. I quilt a hexagon and a half, and then another hexagon and a half, until I filled the first row. When I shift my template over, the black lines on the template go over my previous quilted lines, because of course I'm doing side-to-side hexagons. In this video, I'm quilting on a Bernina Q series, specifically the Bernina Q16 in the horn lift table. As I quilt, you can see the red stitch regulator light shining up through the fabric. I'm going to switch this machine into a manual mode so you can see how you need to move if you're on a domestic machine. So on a domestic machine, I'm regulating my own stitch length. And in manual mode on the Q series, I'm also regulating my own stitch length. And you can see here how steadily I try to move. I slow down a little bit and I move in a very steady motion to keep my stitches about the same length. Time for the next row of hexagons. So in the case of the second row, the third row, and every other row after that, we'll only be stitching the top half of each hexagon, because of course it shares the bottom half with the row below it. So I'm going to stitch up the side of my quilting area, just using the template as a guide, until I get to the point that the black lines on the template lie over the previous row of stitching. And then I'm stitching the top half of the hexagon, coming down until I meet the previous row, and then shifting over the template. So again, the black lines on the template line up over the hexagons in the row beneath. I stitch over the top half of the hexagon, down the side, up the side, and then I shift my template and stitch the next hexagon. This is a really easy and effective fill for both modern and traditional quilts. If you use a smaller template, it's a lovely dense fill for behind applique or in borders and blocks. If you use a larger template, it's a really great all-over fill, particularly for baby quilts or lap quilts. Any quilt you want to remain soft, because there isn't a lot of thread buildup. It's a very open design. I need to come down a little. I came up too far, so I just backed down. Around the top of the hexagon, down and up the side, and shifting the template over. So in this design, I work back and forth. And my stitch regulators are off here just because I want to show you what it's like to quilt on a domestic machine. If I was quilting on a Q series normally with templates, I almost always use BSR2, Bernina Stitch Regulator Mode 2. But I like to also show you how you can quilt this on a domestic machine. I shifted my template just a bit, so I adjusted it to make up for that. I move up the side of the quilting area, and then I'm going to quilt from right to left to complete this row. And finally, I have a little compensating row of hexagons here to complete. So I just travel along the edge of my quilting area, and then I have to quilt these little lines. You might actually put on the template, if you were quilting a row of larger partial hexagons, at the end, but since I'm just quilting little lines here, there's really no need. I can use just the edge, the outside edge of the template. And that's it. That's how you quilt an all-over hexagon film. Next, let's quilt a variation of this, which is a hexagon and diamond all-over fill. So I'll begin once again at the left side at the bottom of the quilting area, and I'm going to quilt a row of side-to-side hexagons. Clip that thread. You can see my stitch regulator is on here because when I sew, you can see those red lights shining up through the fabric. So I can go pretty fast when the stitch regulator is on. Quilting the other direction. I'll end this row at the top point of the last hexagon to be quilted. So I'm going to continue traveling over my lines until I get to that top point, and then I'm going to shift my template up. Now, I'm going to quilt another row of hexagons, and those white lines on the template at the bottom of the template that you see there line up over the previous hexagons. So this row of hexagons shares its bottom point with the top points of the hexagons in the previous row. And what this will create is a hexagon and diamond pattern. You can either backtrack to travel from hexagon to hexagon, or you can quilt a hexagon and a half like I showed you earlier in this video. Once again, I need to get to the top point of the last hexagon in the row before I shift up my template, and those white lines on the template line up over my previous quilting lines. And I begin quilting another row of hexagons. Shift my ruler over, the white line at the bottom of the template lines up over the previous row of hexagons, and I stitch around. My every hexagon templates, like all my templates, are designed for ruler feet that are 1/2 inch in diameter, and the channel of this template is slightly narrower than that. You should not be able to quilt down the channel. The channel is designed to be narrower than the foot so that you can achieve that crisp point on your hexagon. I'll shift the template up, and I think we can fit in one more row of full hexagons. Now I can see there it doesn't quite come to the top, so I'm going to have a compensating motif to take care of up there. That often happens. Now, since it's just such a small little motif, I may take care of it now. Just stitch those 2 little lines. I'll still have to go back and do that first one because I didn't think of this until I got to this point. Shift my template over. This is the last full hexagon. Then I have this little tiny compensating motif. Now I need to go back and take care of that one other compensating motif over here. So I'm going to travel using the edge of my template as a guide, slip on the template. You need to go back a couple stitches and quilt that one last compensating motif. I'll do a few tiny stitches just to lock my threads. I slip off the template. I'll bring my presser foot up and my needle up, grab that top thread, do one more stitch to pull the bobbin thread up, and there you have a diamond and hexagon fill. Now there are multiple ways to create this design. I can work rows of side-to-side hexagons that share points with the rows below and above them, or I could create columns of point-to-point hexagons that share sides with the rows beside them. Either way works. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to use my every hexagon quilting templates. I can't wait to see what you make, so please tag me on Instagram at Amanda Murphy Design and join my Facebook group, Quilting with Amanda Murphy.